Being here for an important topic that the committee has some keen interest and jurisdiction in, dealing with the postal reform that this Congress really needs to address. I want to thank Chairman Issa, the chairman previous to my becoming the chairman, who really, I think, laid a foundation, did a great deal of work on this topic and the issue. So I thank the chairman for all the progress that was made at that time, and I think we've built on that. We're faced, though, with 10 consecutive years of financial losses at the Postal Service, totaling some $62 billion. And the United States Postal Service isn't at a crossroad, it's at the crossroads. It's up to this Congress to address the challenges facing the Postal Service, its customers, the businesses that rely on it, and the taxpayers who will bear the burden if we fail to act. What I think I want the public to understand is that, by and large, there's no appropriation that Congress makes to the Postal Service. The Postal Service has to offer products and generate revenue in order to sustain itself. But there are some things that Congress can do to put it on a more even playing field to make the system more fair as it moves forward. And there are some reform efforts, things that may seem small to the outside, small on the surface, but that can make literally billions of dollars of difference in the financial equation for the Postal Service. And I would argue that as a tool of the economy, it is vital for us to have a good, strong, vibrant Postal Service. It happens to actually be one of the few things that's actually in the Constitution that we're supposed to be working on. So there are a lot of good things that we can do, but it really starts with the members in this room. Let's understand that the difficulties facing the Postal Service are significant. Since 2006, the annual volume of mail delivered by the Postal Service has declined by roughly 30%. While some of these losses are offsetted by unprecedented growth in package delivery, the new revenue is not enough. The Postal Service faces some $119 billion in unfunded liabilities, including $52 billion in liabilities just for retiree health care. Taxpayers will be left holding the bag for these liabilities if we fail to act. We don't want to be in a situation where there has to be a bailout, trying to avoid a bailout. I want people and members to understand that a failure to act will lead us down that path. To its credit, the Postal Service has not sat by idly. Recognizing the challenges, the Postal Service embarked on aggressive cost-cutting measures during the last decade. The agency reduced its career employee headcount since 2006 by roughly 200,000 people. These are people, real people with families and incomes, but that is a dramatic change. I wish others in the federal government had maybe acted as responsibly as the Postal Service has, because they were able to do it without resorting to layoffs. Unfortunately, despite these efforts, the Postal Service cannot fully address its challenges without legislative reform. And for that reason, the last Congress, we worked very closely with Ranking Member Cummings, and I want to really thank him. I also want to thank Congressman Meadows, who's the chairman of our subcommittee, who oversees this. He's poured an untold number of hours and passion into this and expertise, trying to find a reasonable solution. Also heavily engaged, Representative Conley, Representative Lynch, trying to come together and craft a comprehensive bipartisan reform proposal. And that's what I think is also imperative. If we're actually going to get to the finish line and get a bill on the President's desk, I'd like to see that as a bipartisan reform proposal that we can all get behind and champion. I didn't get everything I wanted. Congressman Cummings didn't get everything he wanted. But that's the nature of coming up with a compromise without compromising your principles, but coming up with a compromise that we can all live with that puts the Postal Service on the financial trajectory that it needs to be. Last July, I was proud to see our committee favorably report the bill by a voice vote. Unfortunately, it didn't make it across the finish line before the end of the Congress, but we did make a lot of progress, particularly with getting the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, to come in and score the bill. Building on our legislation from last Congress, last week we introduced H.R. 756, the Postal Service Reform Act of 2007. Our bipartisan group of original co-sponsors grew by one with the addition of Congressman Dennis Ross. He was not on the committee in the last Congress, but he was on the committee before that and spent a lot of time working on the postal issues and We appreciate his expertise. We're also benefited by the expertise of Brenda Lawrence. I want to thank her for her passion and commitment on this. She knows it firsthand, and she is a valuable voice in this legislation moving forward. In an era of partisan politics, this legislation represents a significant bipartisan compromise. The bill gives Postal Service the freedom it needs to successfully meet the business realities the agency faces. To do this, the bill allows the Postal Service to fully integrate its health care plans with Medicare. With such integration, the Postal Service can virtually wipe out its $52 billion retiree health care unfunded liability. Further, the bill achieves real savings by moving to more efficient mail delivery, saving the Postal Service more than $200 a year for each address that can be converted from the door-to-door delivery to centralized delivery. The bill also helps the agency more accurately evaluate its cost structure and reforms key governance matters. Our witness panel today represents a cross-section of the mailing industry stakeholders. I want to thank them personally. I also want to thank a lot of people that are in the audience today and others who we have spent considerable time with trying to come up with a reasonable bipartisan solution that puts the financial trajectory of the Postal Service in the right direction. It is a tool of the economy. It's something that affects every single American, and we need to get it right. With that, I will now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I do thank you for convening today's hearing to examine how we can accomplish the postal reform in this new Congress. Mr. Chairman, after years of work, we came very close, as you said, to enacting legislation reforming the Postal Service during the last Congress. But we simply just ran out of time. Mr. Chairman, you made a very strong commitment at the end of last year, the end of the term. You said this would be one of the first orders of business. And I want to take this moment to thank you for keeping your promise. This is very, very important. And the other thing I thank you for, Mr. Chairman, is so often what happens is that when a lot of work has been done in one term, it's just tossed away. And then you have to start all over again. But I thank you for picking up where we left off and making the bill a better bill, working with all of these people in this audience and the members on our committee, who I'll mention in a few minutes. But again, I want to thank you for that commitment and carrying through with it. And so I'm proud of how much progress we made during the last Congress. After more than a year of negotiations, the chairman and I, together with Subcommittee Chairman Meadows and Subcommittee Ranking Members Connolly and Representative Lynch and Representative Ross and Representative Lawrence, we were able to introduce a bipartisan postal reform bill. Our bill reflected close work with the many stakeholders concerned about postal reform, including most of the witnesses we will hear from today. And I want to, again, thank all of you. One of the things that we found out with regard to the postal system is that we have a lot of stakeholders, and all of those stakeholders were willing to compromise, to work hard, to give their input, and we could not have done this without you. Our bill, we were able to pass this bill out of committee, but ran into delays waiting for a cost estimate from the Congressional Budget Office. We found ourselves working through the 11th hour, negotiating with the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee in the Senate. I want to thank Chairman Chavis and my colleagues for their commitment in advancing this effort today. We've already introduced a bill, this Congress, that is substantially similar to the bill we wrote last Congress. I look forward to considering that bill in this committee and eventually in the full House as soon as possible. The urgency of enacting comprehensive postal reform has only increased. The Postal Service faces deepening financial challenges and eventually will run out of cash without legislative relief. The total volume of mail handled by the Postal Service has fallen by more than 25% since 2006, and continued declines are expected. The costs of the Postal Service's operations have also risen, in part because the Postal Service is required to provide universal delivery service to every address in the United States. Every year, about 900,000 new addresses are created in this country, and the network of postal facilities, letter carriers, and workers must expand to deliver to every new address. 900,000, that's a lot. The Postal Service is burdened by a 2006 statutory requirement imposed by Congress to fully pre-fund its liabilities for retiree health care costs, a requirement that no other federal agency or private sector company faces. These liabilities, combined with the Postal Service's unfunded pension liabilities, currently total about $125 billion, which is almost double its annual revenues. Even as its fixed costs continue to grow, the exigent rate increase that had been approved to enable the Postal Service to recoup some of the losses incurred because of the 2008 recession's permanent impact on mail volume expired. Since 2006, the Postal Service has implemented significant cost-saving measures, including reducing positions and work hours and consolidating facilities and delivery routes. And I want to thank the Postmaster General for her efforts, but I also want to take a moment to thank the unions for bending over backwards and trying to work with the Postal Service and coming up with practical solutions so that on one hand, you protected your employees to make sure that they had security and benefits that they were promised, but at the same time did everything in your power to make sure we had a viable postal service. And I from the depths of my heart, I thank all of you. Altogether, these actions have saved the agency some $14 billion per year. However, there are numerous legal restrictions that limit the Postal Service's ability to cut costs or introduce new products to counteract its deteriorating financial condition. As the Chairman said, none of us got everything we wanted in this bill. One of the things that I have worked for many years is trying to open up the doors for the Postal Service to do other things and to generate new types of income. The things that I really wanted in the bill is not there. But on the other hand, I didn't want to see us throw away this golden opportunity that we have, and perhaps we can work that out some other time. But again, none of us got what we want. I know there are people who are sitting in the audience who are saying, boy, I wish I had that and I wish I had this. Just wish we get the bill through, please. Taking all these requirements and trends together, the Postal Service reported a net loss of $5.3 billion for fiscal year 2016, which represents the 10th consecutive year of net losses. We have repeatedly discussed the deteriorating financial condition at the Postal Service in this committee. But the situation is now worsened by unprecedented lack of any Senate-confirmed members on the Postal Service's Board of Governors. Because many key management decisions are reserved by statute to the Senate-confirmed board members, there are many actions such as establishing rates, class, and fees for products that the Postal Service simply cannot take now. The need for postal reform is as urgent as it ever was. Fortunately, we also may be closer than ever to enacting reform. We must press ahead, all of us. We must continue to work together, Congress, the Postal Service, and the stakeholders to achieve what has been out of reach for so many years. Only we can ensure that this 240-year-old institution, an institution that connects every family, every business, every community in this nation, will continue to be there to serve all Americans. And so I want to thank our witnesses for being here today once again to discuss what we must do to place the Postal Service on a viable, sustainable path for the future. And, Mr. Chairman, if with the unanimous consent, I'd like to give Jerry Connolly.
Here, let me introduce both.
Okay, fine. Okay. Yeah. I understand that the chairman will be introducing our subcommittee ranking and chairman, but I just want to say before you do that, I want to thank you, Mr. Meadows, and I want to thank you, Mr. Connolly, for working so hard to make this happen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. As the gentleman indicated, I would like to recognize Mr. Meadows and Mr. Conley to give brief statements as well. Mr. Meadows is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be very brief. I want to thank you for, as the ranking member talked about, following up on your commitment to finish the work. We talked about the 11th hour. Actually, I think it was the 11th and a half hour or the 11th. I got more phone calls from Senator Carper before the first of the year than I think my wife would normally endure. And so that being said, we're picking up where we left off, hopefully to get it across the finish line in a way that probably makes everybody both happy and sad at the same time, and that's the only way that you get a good bipartisan compromise, is to make sure that there's something for everyone to complain about and for everybody to brag about. And that being said, I think it's incredibly important to recognize that if we do not act, this is really going to affect jobs. When you look at the backbone of the Postal Service, it is not just for those postal employees, but it's for the 7.5 million jobs that it represents either directly or indirectly throughout our economy. And failure to act would also mean that it would require a bailout on behalf of the American taxpayer, something that I am acutely sensitive to and want to avoid if we can. To the tune of some $119 billion minimum. According to my calculations, it could be upwards of $150 to $175 billion in terms of a bailout if we don't act. And so, Mr. Chairman, I just want to applaud you and this committee and the staff for their hours of working very diligently to not only reintroduce this bill, but hopefully have some additional comments from the expert witnesses here today, and I look forward to their testimony, and with that, I'll yield back.
Thank the gentleman. For the balance of the time, we'd like to recognize Mr. Conley of Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first, let me ask unanimous consent that testimony provided by the National Active Retired Federal Employees Association, NARF, opposing our bill be entered into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
I thank the Chair, and I want to commend Chairman Chaffetz and Ranking Member Cummings for their leadership in holding together this coalition. Not easy, and it's a bipartisan coalition that helped write this bill. And especially Chairman Chaffetz could have yielded to the temptation, in light of the circumstances of 2017, to start all over again. And he didn't do that. We worked together, we held it together, and I want to thank all the stakeholders represented in this room and those not in this room for understanding we can't let perfect be the enemy of the good. The Postal Service, as we know it, is insolvent. This bill is intended to put it back on the road to solvency. This bill is intended to correct big mistakes that were made, maybe with the best of intentions, back in 2006 in the lame duck that was called reform, but added an untenable burden to the Postal Service. And we've worked hard at the staff level and with stakeholders and among ourselves as members to come up with a bipartisan bill. It incorporates a number of principles we've been fighting about. I've spent 9 years of my life on postal reform. When I ran for this office, postal reform was not one of my platform provisions. But it became one because of the urgency of the issue. We may have opportunities to perfect it as we go along. Until a bill is passed and sent to the President for signature, it's always a work in progress. And so there may be opportunities to try to perfect things, but the coalition we've got is both strong and fragile. And there are a lot of moving pieces, and sometimes changing one affects all of it. So I commend the Chairman and the Ranking Member and my colleagues, Mr. Lynch, Mr. Meadows, especially, and of course, Ms. Lawrence, who brings so much expertise and experience to this subject, for making this happen. It's not always that we're able to come together on a bipartisan basis on a major piece of reform legislation. It is exactly the kind of work this committee ought to be doing, and we are doing it. And I really thank Mr. Chaffetz for his leadership and his patience, and I thank my colleagues, Mr. Meadows, Mr. Lynch, and of course the ranking member, Mr. Cummings, especially for their hard work on this very important endeavor. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Thank you both very much. I'd ask unanimous consent to enter the following letters of support into the record. The letter from the United Postmasters and Managers of America, the Coalition for 21st Century Postal Service, a letter from the American Catalog Mailers Association, a letter of support from Harlan Clark Holdings, and a letter from the National Association of Postal Supervisors, all in support. Without objection, so ordered. We will hold the record open for 5 legislative days for any member who would like to submit a written statement. And I would also add QFRs, or questions for the record. We will allow 5 legislative days for that. And then we will, if we have any of those, we will be submitting to those that are served on this panel. We would expect and hope a very timely response to any inquiries that might come that way as well. We'll now recognize the panel of witnesses. We're pleased and honored to welcome the Honorable Megan Brennan, the Postmaster General of the United States Postal Service. We have the Honorable Robert Taub, Chairman of the Postal Regulatory Commission. We have Ms. Lori Rictanis, Director of Physical Infrastructure and Issues at the United States Government Accountability Office. Mr. Arthur Sackler is Manager for the Coalition for a 21st Century Postal Service. And Mr. Frederick Rolando, President of the National Association of Letter Carriers. We welcome you all. We thank you for being here. As you know, I think you've all testified before us previously, but pursuant to committee rules, all members are to be sworn before they testify. So if you please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Let the record reflect that all witnesses answered in the affirmative. We will start with the postmaster. As you know, we would appreciate it if you could limit your verbal comments to roughly 5 minutes. We'll be able to give you a little latitude, but your entire written statement will obviously be made part of the complete record. You're going to need to pull those microphones up close and tight to your mouth so we get good, it is broadcast, and we need to make sure we get a good audio out of this as well. The Postmaster General, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee. Thank you, Chairman Chaffetz, for calling this hearing. I'm proud to be here today on behalf of the 640,000 dedicated men and women of the United States Postal Service. The Postal Service provides the nation with a vital delivery platform that enables American commerce, serves every American business and home, and binds the nation together as it has for more than 240 years. The Postal Service is self-funded. We pay for our operations through the sale of postal products and services and do not receive tax revenues to support our business. Over the past decade, total mail volume declined by 28%. First-class mail, which makes the greatest contribution to covering the cost of our networks, declined by 36%. In response, we have streamlined our operations, restructured our networks, reduced the size of our workforce, and improved productivity. As a result of these efforts, we've achieved annual cost savings of approximately $14 billion. We also successfully stabilized marketing mail revenues and grew our package business, which together drive e-commerce growth. However, given the constraints imposed by law, all of those actions cannot offset the negative impacts caused by the consistent decline in the use of first-class mail. The Postal Service is required to maintain an extensive network necessary to fulfill our universal service obligation to deliver the mail to every address 6 days a week, regardless of volume. The cost of the network continues to grow as approximately 1 million new delivery points are added each year. However, less volume, limited pricing flexibility, and increasing costs means that there is less revenue to pay for our growing delivery network and to fund other legally mandated costs. Since 2012, the Postal Service has been forced to default on $33.9 billion in mandated payments for retiree health benefits. Without these defaults, the deferral of critical capital investments and aggressive management actions, we would not have been able to pay our employees and suppliers or deliver the mail. Despite our achievements in growing revenue and improving operational efficiency, we cannot overcome systemic financial imbalances caused by business model constraints. Without legislative and regulatory reform, our net losses will continue and our financial position will worsen, threatening our ability to meet America's evolving mailing and shipping needs. Mr. Chairman, we believe there is broad support for the core provisions of the bill you have introduced. By enacting this urgently needed legislation, which includes those provisions, the Postal Service can achieve an estimated $26 billion in combined cost reductions and new revenue over 5 years. Enactment of these provisions, favorable resolution of the Postal Regulatory Commission's pricing review system, and continued aggressive management actions will return the Postal Service to financial stability. Medicare integration is the cornerstone of your bill. The civilian federal government is not required to pre-fund retiree health benefits, but that obligation is imposed on the Postal Service. We are merely asking to be treated like any business that offers health benefits to its retirees and has to fund them. Full integration with Medicare is a universally accepted best practice in private sector. Requiring full Medicare integration for Postal Service retirees would essentially eliminate our unfunded liability for retiree health benefits. It is simply a matter of fairness to enable the Postal Service and our employees to fully utilize the benefits for which we have paid. We also strongly endorse the provision of the bill that would restore half of the exigent rate increase as a permanent part of our rate base. That provision will help us pay for the infrastructure necessary to fulfill our universal service obligation. Mr. Chairman, our financial challenges are serious but solvable. We appreciate your continued support and your focus on bipartisan postal reform in the 115th Congress. H.R. 756 is fiscally responsible and enables the Postal Service to invest in the future and to continue to provide affordable, reliable, and secure delivery service to every business and home in America. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Cummings, I look forward to working with you and this committee and our stakeholders to restore the financial health of the United States Postal Service. This concludes my remarks, and I welcome any questions that you and the committee may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Chairman Taub, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, members of the committee, good morning. I'll hit a few key points from the Commission's very detailed written testimony. Not much has changed from my last appearance here about 9 months ago. In summary, the Postal Service still faces significant financial obstacles for the future. With its growing liability of retiree health benefits, the inability to borrow for needed capital investments, and the continued loss of high-margin first-class mail revenues, the important task of improving the financial condition of the Postal Service remains daunting. Its total liabilities exceed its total assets by $56 billion. The fundamental problem is that the Postal Service cannot currently generate sufficient funds to cover its mandated expenses and also invest in critically deferred capital needs, such as new delivery vehicles and package sorting equipment. The pressing question is, what needs to be done to improve the financial condition of the Postal Service? Pursuant to statute, the Commission recently submitted a report evaluating the operations of current postal law to the President and Congress. This report provided a variety of recommendations for legislation, which are attached to my written statement. Significantly, the Commission determined that the most important recommendations it could make related directly to improving the Postal Service's financial condition. I commend this committee's bipartisan leadership for coming together just last week, as you did last Congress, to introduce legislation to address these challenges. H.R. 756 is specifically designed to put the Postal Service on sound financial footing. Your invitation noted a focus today also on the significance and potential implications of the Commission's ongoing review of the rate system. By law, after December 20th, 2016, the Commission must review the decade-old price cap system for regulating market-dominant products to determine if the system is achieving its statutory objectives, and if it is not, to, quote, make such modification or adopt such alternative system, end quote, to achieve the objectives. There are 9 objectives listed in the law that must be achieved, as well as 14 factors that the Commission must take into account. When I testified to the committee 9 months ago, I stated that the Commission had already begun marshaling its limited resources to structure the review and schedule a process that would allow full and open opportunities for public participation, while at the same time providing certainty and being decisive in the task. I also committed that the Commission would provide notice to the public of its plans for the review well in advance of commencing it. We delivered on those commitments. On September 1st, during a public meeting, I first announced Commission plans for the review, that it would begin in December, that the comment deadline would extend to very early spring, and by early autumn, the Commission would issue an order that would include its findings and, if necessary, proposed rulemaking information for any changes to the system. Indeed, on December 20th at 8 a.m. sharp, we commenced our review. The Commission has designed a process that seeks targeted input from the public, but also deliberately moves forward with the aim of completing its findings and beginning any needed rulemaking by early autumn of this year. The Commission is mindful that your bipartisan postal reform bill would mandate a process whereby final rules on any modifications or changes to the system must be implemented by very early 2018. We are working hard to meet that goal. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Cummings, for convening this hearing to shine a spotlight on this critical part of our nation's infrastructure. I know you both deeply appreciate the importance of these issues. There are no easy answers, but answer we must. The Commission stands ready to help in your search for solutions. On behalf of all 4 commissioners and the entire hardworking agency staff, thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you. I do appreciate it. We're pleased to have the GAO with us as well. Ms. Rectanis, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to be here today to discuss the Postal Service's financial challenges. While the Postal Service is a critical part of the nation's communication and commerce, its financial situation puts it at risk of not being able to carry out its mission. Its financial condition has been on GAO's high-risk list since 2009. My testimony today covers the factors affecting its financial condition, its unfunded liabilities, and the difficult choices involved in addressing these challenges. First, the continued deterioration of the Postal Service's financial condition is simply a truth that revenues are not keeping up with expenses, a trend since 2007. This means that over the last decade, the Postal Service has had a net loss of over $60 billion. While much of this loss was, in fact, due to the non-payment of retiree health pre-funding payments, the Postal Service still lost over $10 billion outside of this requirement and other requirements. The revenue expense gap occurs because first-class mail, the most profitable mail, continues to decline and is now down to 1981 levels. The Postal Service has made significant efforts to grow revenue in other ways, such as with package services. In the meantime, however, expenses continue to grow, largely because of compensation and benefit payments for employees. This is due to salary increases as well as a larger workforce in the past several years to support the more labor-intensive package business. In fact, over the past 3 years, the workforce has actually increased by over 20,000 people, contrasting sharply with prior years when its size decreased greatly. The Postal Service reported that rising comp and benefit costs generated over $1 billion in additional expenses for active workers in 2016. Bottom line is that postal revenues increased by $2.6 billion in fiscal 2016, but expenses increased by over $3 billion. While the Postal Service has made numerous efforts to right-size operations and undertake other cost-cutting initiatives, it has no current plans to implement the kind of major initiatives that would significantly reduce this financial gap. We recognize that previous efforts have faced resistance from stakeholders, and they would involve trade-offs. But in the absence of such efforts, the Postal Service is not on a solid path for the future. Second, unfunded liabilities and debt total about $121 billion, or almost 170% of annual revenues. They are mostly retiree health and pension benefit obligations for which the Postal Service has not set aside sufficient funds. And as we've mentioned today, about $50 billion of those liabilities are retiree health benefits that remain unfunded, partly because the Postal Service has not made about $34 billion in required pre-funding payments. This year, the Postal Service will have about $10 billion in required payments for retiree health and pension benefits, which is roughly $3 billion over what it paid in 2015 and 2016. Given its poor financial position, Postal Service non-payments are likely to continue. This situation places everyone at risk. If the Postal Service does not adequately fund its benefits, ultimately the taxpayer may be asked to step in, or benefits or pay could be reduced. Because the Postal Service cannot fix these problems by itself, comprehensive legislation is needed to better align expenses with revenues. In doing so, Congress has key considerations. First, what postal services do we need in the 21st century, and how should those be provided? Congress has the opportunity to consider what future customers need on a universal basis and what trade-offs are acceptable. Second, what is the appropriate level of compensation and benefits in an environment of revenue pressures? Congress can consider requiring that the Postal Service's financial condition be considered in any binding arbitration. And finally, what is the continued viability of the Postal Service providing affordable universal service while also remaining self-financing? Congress has the opportunity to consider the pros and cons of various business models and identify the most appropriate model for the future. In conclusion, as we've all said, the status quo is not sustainable, and I hope 2017 is the year of action. This concludes my statement. Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee, I would be pleased to answer any questions you have.
Thank you. Mr. Sackler, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and good morning, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee. The Coalition for a 21st Century Postal Service, or C21, appreciates the opportunity to present our views on the Postal Reform Act of 2017, H.R. 756. We support this bill and urge its approval as promptly as possible. We also support Mr. Lynch's bill, H.R. 760, and urge its approval. Our hope is that you will be able to build upon this rare display of unity among stakeholders behind your bill and move it along. C21 consists of trade associations and companies broadly representative of the $1.4 trillion mailing industry, which supports some 7.5 million jobs. It includes mailers of every kind and every size in every class and category of mail, and their suppliers in paper, printing, equipment manufacture, mail services, and more. I respectfully ask that the study that presents those numbers be made part of the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
We want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, the other original sponsors of this legislation, now joined by Mr. Ross, and your staffs for your efforts and persistence in developing this critical bipartisan bill. Mr. Chairman, as you and everyone else has noted, the Postal Service is in deep financial trouble. Its balance sheet is awash in red ink, and its operations are barely breaking even. The industry respects the job the Postmaster General and her entire team has done in cutting billions in costs and making the system more efficient and effective. But it hasn't been nearly enough. There are two prime reasons: technology and obligations imposed under PAEA. Only a few months after the Postal Service had its best year in 2006, Steve Jobs introduced the iPhone, and the mobile revolution, including social media, was off and galloping. The mail diversion genie is out of the bottle, and no one is going to be able to put it back. And it's a prime reason why there's been such a massive drop-off in the very profitable first-class mail. But the obligations in the tens of billions, especially for the virtually unique mandatory pre-funding of postal retirees' health benefits, is a crushing burden that can be dealt with. When included in 2006's PAEA, no one had an inkling of the peril for paper, brewing, and Cupertino the front-loaded $5.5 billion annually was marginally affordable, but not now and not for years. In the face of this huge liability, the industry confronts the stark reality of a review of the postal rate-setting system that will be conducted by Chairman Taub and the Regulatory Commission. There's a serious risk that liability could be dissipated by rate increases in a new system. That would gravely damage the industry and the Postal Service. To eliminate the Postal Service's red ink would require an increase our economists calculate of about 18%. That's unaffordable in today's environment, even if moderated to 6 to 7% increases per year for several years running. H.R. 756 provides an elegant solution to this profound financial problem. Integrating postal annuitants into Medicare will save the Postal Service billions each year and follow the best practices of the private sector. Companies that offer health insurance to employees and retirees generally require them to join Medicare at age 65. Most important, this integration will preclude the need for taxpayer support. The score on last year's bill with this same change was a net positive. The imposition on Medicare would be comparatively minimal. Integrating remaining annuitants into Medicare is central to our support for this bill. The implications of this bleak financial situation are near existential for Postal Service in its current form, so we support H.R. 756, notwithstanding its one-time market-dominant postal rate increase of 2.15%. We accept this increase in this unique set of circumstances only as necessary to achieve this bill and stabilize the Postal Service. Congress has wisely delegated rate setting to the postal agencies, but with respect, the industry will be compelled to oppose any effort to regard this bill as a precedent for other legislated rate increases. The industry has long supported the self-sustaining postal system funded entirely by postage. That remains the best course from our perspective. And that is the beauty of your bill. It vastly improves the Postal Service's financial stability, keeps the Postal Service self-sustaining, and wards off any prospect of a taxpayer bailout, as you noted, Mr. Chairman. With that, I will conclude my testimony. Thank you for this opportunity, and I will be happy to answer any questions you or your colleagues may have.
Thank you. Mr. Rolando, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Chaffetz and Ranking Member Cummings and the members of the committee for the opportunity to testify on behalf.
I'm not sure that is that microphone on?
No.
Oh, okay, but it's there.
Is that better?
That is much better.
All right.
There you go.
Again, thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of 295,000 active and retired letter carriers and the 3 other postal unions, the APWU, the Rural Letter Carriers, and the Mail Handlers Union. We commend the committee for introducing H.R. 756 and Representatives Lynch and McKinley for introducing H.R. 760, a bill that would greatly improve the way the Postal Service's trust fund for retiree health benefits is invested. This morning I will focus my remarks on the Postal Reform Bill. Please see my written testimony to see why we support the Lynch-McKinley bill. By introducing H.R. 756, the leadership of this committee has set a standard for bipartisan cooperation on legislation that should be emulated. The bill has broad support across the mailing industry, including business and labor, and is based on best practices in the private sector. Bipartisanship on postal reform makes sense, given that the Postal Service is based in the Constitution and operates independently without taxpayer funds. It is vital to our national economic infrastructure. We serve every community, every household, and every business in America at least 6 days a week. At 84%, few organizations have higher public favorability rating than the Post Office, and no other agency engenders a greater sense of trust. In the age of e-commerce, vote by mail, and mail-order prescription drugs, it's more important than ever. There is broad agreement among all the major stakeholders that legislation is urgently required to strengthen the Postal Service. Our coalition of stakeholders believes that the 2 bills introduced last week have the essential elements needed to stabilize and fortify the Postal Service for years to come. Over the past decade, postal employees have worked diligently to restructure operations, cut costs, and sharply increased productivity in response to technological change and the Great Recession. Despite the loss of more than 200,000 jobs, we've managed to preserve our networks and to maintain our capacity to serve the nation. But only Congress can address our biggest financial challenge, the unique and unsustainable burden to pre-fund future retiree health benefits decades in advance. No other enterprise in the country faces such a burden, which was imposed by legislation in 2006. The expense of this mandate is accounted for nearly 90% of the Postal Service's reported losses since 2007. Without a change in the law, the mandate will cost $6 billion this year alone. H.R. 756 would maximize the integration of Medicare and our federal health program for Medicare-eligible postal annuitants, most of whom have already voluntarily enrolled in Medicare Parts A and B. The proposal would also give us access to low-cost prescription drugs and other benefits provided to private employer plans by the Medicare Modernization Act. The savings would help to reduce all of our premium costs and therefore pre-funding costs. This approach adopts the standard practice of large private companies that provide retiree health insurance. It would effectively resolve the pre-funding burden that undermines the health of the Postal Service while only raising Medicare spending by 0.1% over 10 years. H.R. 756 also addresses a revenue shortfall caused by the expiration of the 2013 exigent rate increase authorized by the Postal Regulatory Commission to help the Postal Service recover from the permanent decline in mail volume caused by the Great Recession. The compromise adopted by your leadership bill, effectively restoring half of the exigent increase, is a reasonable one. Mr. Chairman, your bill effectively deals with the two core issues that must be addressed: the unaffordable pre-funding mandate and the expiration of the exigent increase, and it does it in a way that meets the budget scoring rules of the Congressional Budget Office. All four postal unions urge the committee to adopt this legislation. We pledge to work with all of you in our broad coalition of mailing industry partners to achieve postal reform this year. Together, we can strengthen a great national institution, and even better, we can show the country that it is still possible to make our democracy work for the common good at a time of great partisan polarization. Thanks again for inviting me to testify today.
Thank you. I love your passion for it, and not many people get choked up on postal reform, so we appreciate your passion there. And
it's in the blood.
There you go. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes. One of the choices that is before us is to do nothing, right? Just let her go. Just keep on the same trajectory. I'd like to kind of hit the three. Let's start with Ms. Rectanis. From your perspective, do nothing, what happens?
To be quite simply, I guess the doomsday is we're going to run out of money. As an example, in 2017, with the restructuring, the $52 billion that the Postal Service has put aside, that's where premiums are going to start to come out of now. And given that for retirees, the Postal Service has paid 3 to 4 premiums a year, $1 billion in premiums a year, with a total of $52 billion, it's not hard to understand that that fund's going to run out of money. So if we run out of money, what happens? We're talking about a taxpayer bailout, as you had talked about. We're talking about reducing pay and benefits, which could come to trouble. Or we could talk about saddling the Postal Service with coming up with more money when they probably do not have that. So there's not really a good scenario other than we're going to run out of money.
Chairman Taub, what's your perspective on that?
I'd concur with GAO on that. I think I would add that we're in some ways past the point where it's somewhat salvageable. I think in the early years after the Great Recession, if it was just the pre-funding issue and that had gotten fixed, Postal Service may have had some breathing room. Right now, over half of the problem goes beyond just the pre-funding, and we're starting to see, as I said, the impact of assets that have not only getting to the end of their depreciated life, but are fully depreciated. And the inability to invest in where there are opportunities of innovating the core, as the Postmaster General calls it, you need capital to do that. And when your borrowing authority is maxed out, you have roughly 30 days of cash on hand. Not only would I concur with the GAO's assessment, but I would argue we're already in the danger zone.
But what's your general perception, if you can, and you may not be able to, but what is your general perception of what would happen to postal rates?
Under current law, as we speak, the majority of their products, market dominant, letter mail, periodicals, flats, advertising mail, are capped at CPI and only for extraordinary circumstances. We're in the midst of that review now, trying to balance these 9 objectives. I would note in regard to your question and the focus of the hearing today, objective number 5 speaks of having financial viability in the sense of retained earnings and financial stability. So one of the 9 objectives that must be applied equally goes to the heart of this financial issue.
And Postmaster, what, from your perspective, we do nothing, what does that picture look like?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, clearly the financial condition worsens and the continued default on legally obligated payments that impact both current employees and retirees. And the most egregious failure would be an inability to meet our obligation to serve the American public, an inability to deliver the mail.
What is your current cash on hand? And then once you give me that number, then why isn't that used to pay some of the payments that were due? You've defaulted, I believe, on 5 payments.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we've defaulted for the past 5 years to the tune of $33.9 billion. Our current cash on hand is $8.2 billion. And a determination was made by the Temporary Emergency Committee, which consisted at the time of our lone independent governor, myself, and the Deputy Postmaster General, to default on that payment to ensure that we conserve sufficient cash, which for an organization of our size is arguable at best, but to reserve sufficient cash to ensure if there is any contingency that would occur in the near term, we could at least have some cushion.
I mean, you have more cash than some of the others who are in the mail industry, but where is that proper balance? Where's...
Well, and I think that's a concern, Mr. Chairman, because for an organization that has expenditures of more than $70 billion a year, we would submit that $8.2 billion is insufficient. That's the concern for us. And also, as noted by the chairman, and we've discussed this, the fact that we have deferred on critical capital investments in the past 5 years to the tune of over $8.9 billion, that impacts our ability to compete and to generate additional revenues.
Tell us, if you can give me a perspective on your fleet and fleet management. There was a hearing, I think Chairman Meadows chaired earlier about the fleet. We were concerned the Postal Service was going to come up with a very sizable contract but explain to me where you are in the fleet and where your perspective on it.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Well, we have one of the largest civilian fleets in the country with over 212,000 vehicles traveling more than 4 million miles a day. The fleet, though, is at the end of its expected life, particularly our delivery vehicles, that the average age is over 25 years. And the maintenance, annual maintenance cost is over $1 billion. So we have an approach to look at the next generation delivery vehicles that currently we're in the midst of a prototype testing period where we're working with 6 different suppliers to provide us with these vehicles that we will test over the course of the next 18 months. We also just, this week actually, a request for proposal for a commercial off-the-shelf solution for right-hand drive vehicles is expected. So we've got a multi-pronged approach looking at how to address the vehicle fleet.
Okay. Mr. Cummings had follow-up on that.
Just one question. What are we doing about, when you consider the fleet, making it in America? I mean, are these, what do you all aim at? Is there any, we've got a lot of concern about trying to make sure we give our automobile industry as much business as possible. I just wondering what you did.
And Congressman Cummings, we haven't made any decision in terms of the production phase of that next generation delivery vehicle, but we will follow our typical protocol, which is preference for domestically sourced parts, and we will require production of the vehicle, assembly of the vehicle in the United States.
Well, you should expect to hear from President Trump this afternoon.
All right, we'll now recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Lynch, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the witnesses. Mr. Chairman, you deserve great credit on this. I have to say we've done a masterful job with the able support of Mr. Cummings and the relentless leadership of Mr. Connolly and Mr. Meadows, who have really avoided the landmines during this whole process. And I think as well we have been helped enormously by Ms. Lawrence on our side and Mr. Ross, who a long time ago get into this battle. There are a bunch of others. You know, it's just been a negotiation. We've been in the trenches. It's been a little bit like mud wrestling at times, but we've come out of this in pretty good shape based on the stakeholders' testimony this morning. I don't want to leave anybody out here. I know that Fred Rolando, our president of the letter carriers, is here, but also behind him, Jim Sauber and Corey Keller have been enormously helpful to us during negotiations. With the rural letter carriers, Jeanette Dwyer and Paul Schwartz have been terrific. The APWU, that's my mother's union and my sister's union. I have about 17 members of my extended family that are either letter carriers or postal clerks, so this is important for me to be able to go home. But Mark Dimmenstein and Jennifer Warburton have been terrific with us. Great job. And our mail handlers, President Paul Agrogian and also Bob Losey with the Laborers International and the Mail Handlers Union have been terrific. And also Postmaster Brennan, you've been dynamite on this, and there's been there's been compromise necessary on all parts, but you've been terrific in your relationship with the unions, which has made my life much easier. But also Sheila Myers and Ron Stroman, our old friend who used to be on this committee, and as well the staff on both sides. Majority staff has been extremely patient, as is our staff. They've been doing a great job. Probably the key component of this proposal is really is two-pronged. One is the establishment of postal-specific health plans within the Federal Employees Health Benefit Program. What we're going to do is require postal employees to actually sign up for Medicare and coordinate their benefits. Is going to save us a ton of money, and also get away from that annual $5.5 billion that we require the Postal Service to contribute to accelerating their retirees' health benefits. But I just do want to ask the Postmaster General about that. So there are some concerns out there about the funding of the funding of that piece that will require postal employees to sign up for Medicare, and that it is some type of giveaway. That's what I've heard out there. Now, you and I know differently, but could you explain to me how much money the postal workers have contributed to Medicare, but in large part have not participated in that? Could you describe that for me, please?
Yes, Congressman. In our opinion, this is a question of fairness. We're merely asking that we be treated like any other self-funded entity that provides retiree health benefits, as noted by a number of the panelists. It's best practice in private sector. And that's the ask from the Postal Service. And our employees and the Postal Service have paid more than $30 billion into the Medicare Trust Fund since the early 80s. And we're just asking to receive the benefit for which employees have paid.
That's great. Mr. Orlando, on the accelerated funding of employee health benefits that costs the post office about $5.5 billion a year. Is there any other agency in the United States government that is required to accelerate their funding like this, or are they allowed to pay as people are projected to retire? Could you press your? There you go. You sound like a Patriots fan.
No comment.
Take the fifth, I know.
No, there's no other agency or private company that is required to do the pre-funding. And I think relative to the chairman's question, I think what happens absent the legislation is one of two things. We either are in a position to just pay the premium each year for the retiree health benefits and remain 50% pre-funded, which is 50% more than anybody else. Or the other option would be if we need to be at 100%, we have to deal with that in the rates process, which nobody else wants to do.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I thank you for your indulgence, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Ms. Brennan, I want to make sure we clarify one thing. I think your statement was that, and maybe I misheard, that postal employees paid $30 million. I think it's $30 billion.
$30 billion,
okay.
sir.
All
Yes,
right, all
$30
right.
billion.
Thank you. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Farenthold, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. And Postmaster General Brennan, the big financial crush, obviously, that we hear again and again is the decline in the volume of first-class mail, which is basically your profit center. And so is there a bottom to this where, as people have start to get all of their bills by electronic mail and are paying electronically, there's the email penetration is way up there in this country, but there's certain things you just want to do in the mail, thank you notes, certain types of invitations. I'm much more likely to open a catalog, well, it's not first class, but we get into advertising. I'm much more likely to open a catalog that comes to me in the mail than I am to click on something in a, quote, spam type email. So is there a bottom to the loss of volume that has been looked at or projected anywhere? And is there a turnaround there?
Congressman, the single-piece first-class mail, which is the stamp mail, which is most susceptible to electronic diversion, we do project out the current secular trends to continue, roughly a 4% decline each year.
In perpetuity?
As far out as the next 5 years. Beyond that, I think it's more art than science, frankly. What I would submit is that the largest portion of the first-class mail piece is commercial mail, which is, as an example, bill presentment. Mr. Sackler represents a number of these mailers and would tell you that the value of that mail, and many consumers still want that statement in the mail. We have worked with the industry, promotions, to turn that mail room into a marketing center as opposed to just a cost center. So that's gone a long way in terms of helping to stabilize that particular component of the mail. But I think our responsibility, and we've demonstrated that, is that we will continue to scale to demand. Adjust the infrastructure as necessary.
But there's a limit to how you can scale to demand, I would think, when you've got to service 100% of the country. So I guess that's my next question is, you mentioned that part of your expenses is 6-day delivery to everywhere. Is it worth looking at some point in the future, maybe not 6 days to everywhere for everything? I mean, to be competitive, maybe you do need 6, and actually I think one of your competitive advantages is 7-day package delivery. Over Christmas, I got packages from Amazon that you guys brought on Sunday. Matter of fact, I got one a couple of weeks ago. Apparently, you're still doing it. So is shrinking to a less than 6-day delivery for non-packages a potential cost savings?
Yeah, as you noted, we are delivering packages 7 days in select locations, primarily major metropolitan areas.
Hey, I'm happy Corpus Christi is now, Texas is now a major metropolitan area.
I said primarily, and we are expanding that, because certainly we serve every home and every business, Congressman. To your point, and candidly, we've spent the better part of the past 2 years trying to build a coalition around core provisions of a bill likely to generate broad support. And that's what we focused on. And also, I would offer candidly, it's been my experience that there's no congressional consensus around moving to 5-day delivery.
Well, I can tell you that this for sure as well. But let's go back to Amazon for a second. I think they gave you all a big boost over the holiday season. I think they're the #1 customer for package delivery across you and your competitors in the country. But their stated goal is to cut you guys out. So, I mean, in the long term, is this something that you can count on, or am I going to see the Amazon drone delivering my package?
Amazon is obviously a valued customer and business partner. I would say that there is competition in every product line, and none more than in the last mile of delivery, whether it be the traditional competitors, Amazon, the crowdsourcing of package delivery. So we're well aware of what those headwinds look like. And again, I would offer that our ability then to scale to demand. We've got to compete for that business every day, and we'll continue to do that to earn that business.
All right, and finally, you talked about capital expenses beyond, your biggest being vehicles. What are your big capital, just list off the couple of items that are your big capital items beyond vehicles.
The information systems, our IT infrastructure, repair and alteration, facility modifications, additional capacity for package sortation.
All right. Well, I see my time has expired. I may be around for a second round of questioning if you guys are.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. The chair recognizes the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rectanus. The last time you were here to discuss the postal issues in May of 2016, you testified, and I quote, "The Postal Service's financial condition continues to deteriorate." You attributed the decline in the financial condition to declining mail volume and growing expenses. What trends have you observed in the Postal Service's financial condition over the last 8 months, and has that deterioration continued?
We've observed a continued sort of the same decline that we saw before. The same types of losses, about the same non-payment of the pre-funding, continuing in the difficulty to generate the kind of revenue in order to support the expenses.
And let's go through some of the financial figures for fiscal year 2016, Ms. Brennan. At the end of fiscal year 2016, the Postal Service reported $610 million in controllable income, compared to $1.2 billion in controllable income at the end of fiscal year 2015. Is that right?
That's correct.
Controllable income excludes retiree health benefits, pre-funding pension liabilities, and workers' compensation liabilities, correct?
That's correct.
According to your fiscal year 2016 financial results, as a result of the expiration of the exigent rate increase, and I quote, "Revenue for 2016 was lower by approximately $1 billion when it otherwise would have been." And the Postal Service has reported that, and I quote, "Going forward, without the surcharge, the Postal Service expects its revenue to decline from what it otherwise would be by almost $2 billion per year." Ms. Brennan, can the Postal Service afford to lose an additional $2 billion in revenue each year going forward?
No, sir.
Do you believe that the exigent rate increase needs to be restored?
I do, and as this coalition has discussed with the leadership of this committee, the compromise proposal to half it, the Postal Service is supportive of that, as packaged as part of a larger reform bill.
Ms. Brennan, I also have concerns about the state of the Postal Service's liquidity, particularly given that the Postal Service has exhausted the credit limit of $15 billion. How many days of cash do you currently have on hand?
It's roughly 30 days, Congressman.
Have liquidity problems affected, or do you anticipate that they will affect the Postal Service's ability to pursue needed capital investments?
It will. As we've done in recent years, we'll prioritize our capital spend, recognizing that given the competitive landscape, in order for us to continue to compete and generate additional revenues, we need to invest.
Now, Mr. Taub, last year, when you appeared before the committee to discuss postal operations, you testified that based on Postal Regulatory Commission's analysis of the Postal Service financial strain, and I quote, "There is a high probability that the Postal Service will go into financial distress," end of quote. Is that assessment, is that still valid?
Yes, it is, Congressman.
Absent any legislative action, when might the Postal Service experience financial distress?
Trying to crystal ball things like that is difficult, but I would say in the short term, we're looking in that 5-year window, as the Postmaster General indicated. They've done their own look forward, and absent change, about in the 2 to 3 year window, there's some real challenges for the Postal Service. That being said, to the Postal Service's credit, they have ensured that delivery to the American mailing consumer and businesses remains the top priority. So whereas they may start seeing some challenges with meeting service standards, for example, or being able to keep certain facilities open, their commitment to continuing to deliver is front and center. So for the average consumer, we may not see the full brunt of it right away, but there's some hell to pay, shall we say, if there isn't change.
No, Mr. Brennan, let me, I said, I kind of joked about it, but I was serious. On this fleet situation, how is that decided? Because you can imagine that you're gonna hear there's gonna be some tweeting about you this afternoon. But tell me, how is that decided with regard to the fleet? That's a lot of jobs. That's a lot of vehicles.
We have a competitive procurement process where, in this example that I cited on the next generation delivery vehicles, we had a request for proposal that went out. It was open competition. And we ended up with, we selected 6 suppliers. I'll provide for the record, I believe we had maybe 10 suppliers in total that competed for the process. I'll provide that for you.
Yeah,
but again,
please do. Please do. I said I'd love to see that. Yeah. And finally, and I'll close with this, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for your indulgence. Many industries, millions of jobs and millions of people depend on the Postal Service. I believe that Congress must act now, and we must act right now, to help put the Postal Service on a sustainable path forward. This committee should quickly consider the bipartisan postal reform bill we have introduced, and the House should adopt the measure as soon as possible. And again, I just want to, I don't know how this hearing is going to go because I know we got votes coming up, but I want to thank everybody, every single body. I didn't mention everybody's names, but you know who you are. I really, really thank you. Now, you all have got to, I believe that we are on the, I'd say about the 5-yard line, and you all have, well, let's say 10. You all have got to help us get the ball over the line. I mean, seriously. You let the members of Congress know how you feel and give us the support that we need. Thank you very much.
I thank the gentleman. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Iser, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank Mr. Cummings for giving me a different opening than I was going to have. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a third quarter, and you're down by 25 points. And if Tom Brady doesn't come in, the fact is you're bankrupt. You're beyond bankrupt. You're in record deficit. Let me just go through the numbers, because I, like Mr. Cummings, Mr. Chaffetz, want this bill to move, and I wanted to accomplish what a bill a little over 10 years ago didn't. 10 years ago, when I was young to this committee, we in fact, are we going to get into Patriots jokes here? If we are, let me know. But 10 years ago, roughly, we thought we'd fix this, and all we really did was give you a line of credit that you ran up against your deficits. So if I do the arithmetic, round numbers, 33.9, I'll call it $34 billion, that's what you haven't paid. That was your obligation under the law to pay, and you simply defaulted on it. Ms. Victanis, I'll use you for the numbers, make sure I'm right. Deferred maintenance is about $9 billion, those vehicles and things that just have to be restored sooner. The wheels literally will fall off. There's $15 billion that Congress gave in a line of credit that simply went to pretend like bills were being paid when in fact it was simply taking care of the losses. So that comes out to 57.8 if my pencil was right. But I'm sure there's some odds and ends on top of it. And since we're running at $500 million a month of loss, anything we say by the time it gets enacted will be over $60 billion. During my entire tenure on this committee, people have talked about having to prepay and how, that's onerous, but there's only about $50 billion in prepay. So the debt is far greater than the prepay today. So if we just wipe those across each other, you still have a net debt. Isn't that true, Ms. Retatis?
That is true. The unfunded liabilities are about $121 billion. So yes, while RHB is 50-some billion of that, there is a significant amount of additional debt.
Okay, so if we did a classic bankruptcy sort of back of the envelope, we take the assets of the prepaid and we wipe it out against the all these deferreds. You put it back and forward, you still end up in the same boat, which is there's no net equity in the post office. Additionally, the post office is losing money, even with, in the bill, even with the transfer of the obligation from Post Office First to Medicare First, meaning that the taxpayers, which includes postal workers who pay into Medicare, are going to get a bill. Their costs are going to go up in return for the post office going down. And I supported that during my chairmanship. I'm not trying to walk away from that provision. It's something I expect we'll do. But you still end up with a loss, right, Ms. Retatis?
Yes, there are other things going on with the Postal Service's business model that are beyond the retiree health.
Okay.
Fundamentally, revenues are still having a difficult time keeping up with expenses.
Okay, well, let's go through this. And I always make the assumption that we're not cutting pay of any worker. We're not firing or laying off any worker. But we can and should make our labor force the right size going forward. So if we went aggressively toward no longer having a small portion of the population get mail put in a chute, and those who are in single boxes going to near single boxes, 2s, 4s, in other words, we went to an all-clustered arrangement, the way Carmel, California, Rancho Santa Fe in my district, some of the most affluent neighbors, in addition to some of the poor neighbors, already have cluster boxes. That still saves about the difference between the loss and a profit, doesn't it?
In terms of moving to delivery, there are potentially significant savings to that approach.
Additionally, the United States Post Office, with the power of the government, if they chose to aggressively cite in or near people's homes cluster boxes that could safely hold packages, they would leapfrog in service capability what Amazon is trying to build at your corner gas station, wouldn't they? And I guess I should take that to the Postmaster General. Not what are the problems, but if you did that, wouldn't you in fact offer a service far better and far more distributed than that which Amazon is trying to build today in some parts of urban America?
Congressman Issa, as you and I discussed, the Postal Service approach is all new possible deliveries. As noted, we add nearly 1 million a year. Based on the delivery characteristics, we either implement box on post at the end of your driveway or centralized delivery. And just looking at last year, where when we looked at the growth by mode, over 750,000 new deliveries were centralized. So there's certainly an efficiency gain associated with that.
Okay, and don't we owe it to the American people to be efficient everywhere, to find not pockets of resistance, but in fact to say that all recipients are created equal, they pay the same amount. If there is an excess charge because of distance, meaning, and I see some of the rural delivery people here in the audience, it costs more to get it 30 miles out in the country in an unpopulated area, but it shouldn't cost more to get it delivered in an urban environment than it actually cost in that rural environment, should it?
Well, as you know, we have a universal service obligation. In terms of efficiency, as noted, based on the delivery characteristics, and we try to strike a balance, clearly, in terms of the need to meet the customer.
Chairman, I'm just going to have one very quick follow-up just to get the record complete, if I could. If you implemented cluster at every point in America to the greatest extent physically possible, and not over the objections, but physically possible, wouldn't you save enough money to be in the black with the other changes that are in this legislation such that you could make investments and, in fact, be better prepared to compete against those who are trying to essentially take over work that you're better suited to do in principle today?
The gentleman's time's expired, but you can briefly answer.
Thank you. I would say in addition to this bill, a favorable outcome of the PRC 10-year price review and continued aggressive management actions, we can be solvent a decade beyond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, I thank the gentleman. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Michigan, Ms. Lawrence, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to acknowledge the chairman and the ranking member Cummings and the committee for all the hard work they have done. I looked Chairman Chaffetz in the eye and constantly had the ear of Congressman Cummings that this was a very important responsibility of this committee, and I thank you both for your leadership. I want to ask a question about, we all know that the Postal Service is dependent upon the rate of the cost of mail to generate revenue. So under the Postal Accountability Enhancement Act, the Postal Regulatory Commission was required to establish a new system to regulate rates for market-dominant products. The act also mandated that the commission review the rate system 10 years later to determine if the system is meeting the objectives established by Congress. The commission began the review in 2016, and it stated, and I quote, "The commission will determine if the objectives taken into account the factors are being achieved by the current system." Mr. Taub, if the commission finds that the system is meeting its objective, does the review end?
Under the law, it speaks to if the commission finds that there's a need for a modification or a change to the system, if necessary, it would undertake a rulemaking to take that change. Conversely, if there is no change needed, there wouldn't seem to be a need for a rulemaking change. But that being said, we're in the midst of that review, and I certainly don't want to prejudge how it might come out.
Well, you're in the midst of it, but I have a question. Will the commission consider service performance in determining whether rates are fair?
Oh, we have to. It's one of the 9 objectives. Objective number 3 is to maintain high-quality service standards established by law. There are 9 objectives in the law, and they all have to be applied concurrent with the others. So it's a challenge. There's objectives such as creating predictability and stability in rates, allowing the Postal Service pricing flexibility. There's the mandate that we have to assure adequate revenues, including retained earnings, to ensure financial stability. And there's several others, even including deterring terrorism and protecting the mail.
Absolutely.
So
I want to ask the
to balance.
Postmaster General, Brennan, talk to me about, because I am so committed to the postal reform, but tied to that is our customer service performance. So can you speak to that when it comes to the rates, and how does this impact your vision and policies for the Postal Service?
Yes, Congresswoman. In fact, as noted, the favorable outcome of the Postal Regulatory's 10-year price review is very important to us. While we recognize that we're not going to price our way out of this, and we certainly don't want to do anything that would further accelerate movement out of the mail, we recognize that we have competition in every product line. So we're looking for pricing flexibility. In fact, I would say that our position is that a price cap is fundamentally unsuited in a network environment. That said, for us, service goes beyond transit time, and as you and I have discussed, it's that customer experience at every touch point in the organization, and we are investing in additional training to ensure that we are providing the best possible customer experience for the American public.
Mr. Taub, I wanted to bring up recently a joint alliance of 16 mailers filed a motion with the commission requesting changes to the review procedural schedule. Specifically, they asked to be allowed to provide reply comments. The commission denied this motion. As you're aware, the decisions of the commission will make the rate system more profoundly impact our billion mailing industry. What opportunities will exist to ensure that the industries weigh in during this review process?
Thank you, Congresswoman. Indeed, we're in the midst right now of what is termed an advance notice of proposed rulemaking. So we are at the very initial stages of looking at the system and have opened up a very long 90-day comment period for anyone in the American public and industry to provide us comments. As I mentioned, early autumn of this year would be the time when we're hoping to be able to issue our order to say, is the system meeting the objectives? If not, if we are going to move to the next phase, that would begin a notice of proposed rulemaking, which in that process provides a very robust comment period. So we're quite a ways from being in a position to say with any certainty what the commission will do. And if it is a change, that would have to take the form of a final rule that first would go through a very robust notice and comment process.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will yield back.
I thank the gentleman. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Heiss, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Brennan, I want to go back to some other comments that have been made just to try to get a little broader perspective. One of the issues that came up specifically dealt with Amazon and a serious competitor that they are. And one of the areas of technology that they've excelled in, obviously, is drone delivery. Is there any looking into consideration of drone delivery with the Postal Service?
Currently, our engineering group is researching, and we're probably on the peripheral of this advanced technology currently, just learning. And I would say whether it's drone exploration or any other type of new technology, Congressman, we need the capital monies to be able to invest.
Well, I understand the need for capital monies to invest, but you are looking into the possibility.
We're exploring and recognizing what's happening in the industry. Right now, we're not an early adopter, I would categorize that, but we're certainly aware of what's happening in that space.
Okay, so at the current time, then, the commitment is to continue with the vehicle delivery?
Correct.
Okay, and it's astounding to me, and I think probably most people, to know you've got over 200,000 vehicles on the road, doing some 4 million miles a day. That's a staggering amount. I'm curious, you mentioned the commercial off-the-shelf right-hand drive proposal as well as the next generation delivery vehicles. First of all, the commercial off-the-shelf, how many proposals did you receive?
Actually, they're due this week, either today or tomorrow, so I don't have that information. I'll
So,
provide it for the record.
Do you know what you would anticipate?
I don't.
Okay. When will an award be granted with that? Do you have any idea?
Well, we'll do our due diligence depending on how large that potential supplier pool is, but we'd want to move with pace, given the need.
And what would that pace look like? Are we talking months or?
Months, yes.
Okay, so 6 months-ish?
Yes, or less.
Okay, or less, okay. And the next generation delivery vehicles, with that, when will the testing begin?
The testing we anticipate will begin next fall.
Okay, so fall of 2018?
Correct, of
So this coming fall?
2017, yes.
2017,
Yes,
okay.
the suppliers have 1 year in which to develop the prototypes. And then we anticipate testing for a good probably 12 to 18 months. We'd like to test those vehicles in different climates and different topography and the like.
And how will you determine the most cost-efficient product between the two?
Best value, we would look at a host of factors. We'd look at the life cycle cost. We'll also look at certainly fuel efficiency and ensure we've got industry best standard with safety features and the like. And also, obviously, the efficiency for our employees to be able to maneuver safely in the back of the vehicle.
Okay. How in the world are you going to fund this acquisition?
Therein lies the challenge for us,
Yes,
Congressman. We've deferred, and it's why the vehicles are beyond their expected life span, and it's why we're incurring these costs to keep them on the road. So the sooner we can get this bill passed, the sooner we can get an outcome from the 10-year price review, and then again, incumbent upon management to continue to do our part to control costs.
But you are looking at an acquisition.
We have made no decisions on production. We're merely in a prototype testing phase.
Okay. Then what would, when the time comes, and obviously at some point it's going to have to come, when the time comes, how many vehicles are you looking at?
We've made no commitments on numbers, but if you look just at the delivery fleet, it could be as high as 140,000, but there's been no commitment made to any quantity of vehicles in a production environment.
Right. I understand that there's no commitment because you're still waiting on the funding aspect of it all. Is there any consideration, though, of looking just to throw an arbitrary number out of purchasing maybe 10,000 vehicles at a time, or do you feel the requirement to get 100+ thousand?
No, it'll depend, first of all, on available capital to fund that, and we certainly want to be flexible enough because obviously technology is changing, and you want to ensure that the Postal Service would be able to benefit from any changes in technology. So there's no commitment in terms of a defined number of vehicles that we would purchase in any given year.
So that's all up in the air. Last question. Obviously, the vehicles we have 2+ decades old. At some point, a decision has to be made. What kind of time frame do you think we're working under?
Well, in addition to the next generation delivery vehicle and now the commercial off-the-shelf solution that we'll evaluate, we also have a bridge strategy where we typically replaced in the past, say in the past 2 years, up to 12,000 vehicles at a time. But again, the decision will be made based on available funding and certainly based on supplier ability to provide the vehicles for us.
Well, thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Conley, for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair. Ms. Brennan, the fixed payments established in Title V of the U.S. Code for pre-funding of the Retiree Health Benefit Fund expired in 2016, but the payments in that fund are required to continue. What are the payments expected to be in 2017? Mr. Rolando in his testimony pointed out they're actually expected to grow.
Well, in addition to the normal costs and the amortization costs for the RHB, we also have the requirement for our pension obligations. So in sum total, our retirement-related payments exceed $10 billion.
$10 billion.
$10 billion.
And is that the large source of the insolvency concern?
It is.
It is. And the legislation that, the bipartisan legislation that you've been involved in, that we've introduced, would that address that issue?
As noted, Congressman, this bill, as proposed, would generate over $26 billion over a 5-year period in new revenue and cost savings. And then it's incumbent upon management to continue to drive operating efficiency, and also we look to the chair and the PRC for a favorable outcome of the price review.
Mm-hmm. And then let me see, you've also got on top of that, you've got the payments to cover the pension liabilities, is that correct, of your employees?
Yes, and I included that, sir, in the 10.3.
And that's $1.5 billion?
Correct, it's 1.2.
In 2017?
Correct, for the CSRS, it's 1.2,
Right.
sir.
And you got Federal Workers' Compensation Fund, which I think is $1.4 billion, roughly?
Yes.
2017. So total payments due on September 30th. My calculation roughly is about $8 billion. Yours is 10?
Due on September 30th is actually $6.7 billion. What I cited was the annual costs of all retirement-related payments.
Got it. And frankly, that's just a weight too heavy.
It is.
Okay. And so I think that really makes for the compelling case for why we simply can't let well enough alone. We have to do something, or we're going to lose the Postal Service as we know it. Is that your assessment as well as the Postmaster General?
It's urgent, Congressman, and as noted previously, absent this legislative action and the regulatory reform, the financial condition worsens. We continue to default. We put at risk current and future current retirees and future retirees, benefits at risk, and we threaten our ability to meet our universal service obligation.
I want to also salute you, Ms. Brennan. I've worked with several Postmasters General. I think you've really tackled this job with an open mind. You've listened to competing points of view. You have tried to make sure the stakeholders are represented. You've shown respect for the workforce and for even dissenting points of view. I think your willingness to state the case but also be flexible in trying to find solutions and be open to other points of view, I think, frankly, has helped break the logjam up here, and that was a spirit we were lacking, frankly, in the past.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you for your leadership.
Mr. Rolando and Mr. Sackler, you're kind of representing stakeholders from different points of view. I assume you both concur something like this is necessary, and absent this, we risk the collapse to the Postal Service as we know it.
Yeah, this is...
And I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but your support gives evidence to something.
Helps, yeah. No, I think this legislation is important. That's why we support it. But I also think, to the other extreme, it's important to offer a perspective on what Chairman Issa mentioned, that, when you look in terms of fairness and what we're required to do versus other agencies and other companies, his analogy with regard to bankruptcy, I think every federal agency in the government and many companies would also be in bankruptcy under the analogy that he offered. But yes, we're prepared to work and go forward with this legislation, very necessary.
Mr. Sackler.
Well, Mr. Connolly, we strongly support this bill. We think that you and the chairman and the ranking member and Mr. Meadows and Mr. Lynch have really come up with a solution that's absolutely necessary. Without this kind of relief lies disaster for the Postal Service and for changing it into something that we don't recognize. I would just add, though, another thing to be wary about is the rate-setting system proceeding that the Commission is undertaking. If the rate cap is removed and the liabilities are addressed through rate increases, then it's basically, in terms of loss of volume, you ain't seen nothing yet. That will guarantee that all of the obligations and the entire set of problems that the Postal Service has will land once again on your doorstep, and those obligations will have to be funded by the Treasury. The industry, sizable pockets of the industry, have never recovered from the Great Recession, and when you couple that with the kind of diversion from the mail that we are seeing, and first class is the most prominent example, more than a third of that is already gone. The commercial first class mail that has left the system at a slower pace than single piece first class mail, those folks now have a huge array of electronic options. If the price is too much,
I would just
that's where they go.
observe, in yielding back, and my friend Mr. Meadows and I have worked on an entity with a similar dilemma, Metro. If you get in a vicious cycle where we cut back services and raise prices, you lose more customers, requiring you to cut back on services and raise more costs. And that becomes a never-ending vicious cycle that can also yield to very undesirable outcomes. So your caution is well taken, and I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. The chair recognizes a welcome addition back to the committee, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Ross, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. 4 years ago, I left this committee, and at that time, this issue was in a great deal of contention. We've been working. We tried to bring things together. Unfortunately, we didn't have a plan together. I laud my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. I laud those in the panel for bringing together this package. Unfortunately, I feel that my only contribution has been the fact that I left this committee 4 years ago. But having said that, I think...
And by the way, there's been a void.
Thank you, Jerry. I do stand here very much in support of maintaining, sustaining, resurrecting, and otherwise making sure the Postal Service stays alive for a very, very long time and continues to serve the American public. And so I'm glad to be an original co-sponsor of this bill. I'm glad that we're moving this along, and I'm very hopeful that this will get through. Having said that, I do have some concerns that I still had some time ago. And Mr. Brennan, you mentioned that you need to be able to compete and to invest in order to gain revenue. My question to you is, are you looking at investing in infrastructure for competitive products or for market-dominant products? In other words, are you looking at partial investment or first-class mail or market-dominant products?
Congressman, it's both in some cases, because some of when I think of the processing equipment in our facilities that needs to be replaced.
So parcel can be more efficient.
In this case, I'm talking about letter sortation to be more efficient. The look at deploying robotics to reduce overall labor costs, that would be to support market-dominant products in the example that I'm referencing here, but also to support competitive products.
And Chairman Taub, my concern is that in 2002, I believe it was, the USPS attributed 4% of its delivery cost to packages, competitive products, parcel. In 2016, package volume doubled, and letter mail, first-class mail, declined by 25%, yet the USPS still attributes less than 5% of its delivery cost to packages. My concern is are we subsidizing, are we taking market-dominant products, first-class mail, and using revenues from that to subsidize a competitive product?
Under the law in our review, that's not.
You can't do it under the PAEA. So right. Is it a concern of yours, though, that if we as Congress raise rates by 1 cent, that increased revenue, is that going to go to what? Is it going to go to subsidize a competitive product?
No. Under the bill as written, it's on the market-dominant side. And right now, the one area where the Postal Service is receiving money that is going to the institutional cost of the Postal Service is on the competitive side. In fact, market-dominant is a big money loser. There's a whole class of products that aren't covering their costs, standard mail. So, frankly, the cost coverage problems are predominantly on the market-dominant side.
I understand your testimony to me that the parcel system, the parcel delivery system, the package delivery system is covering its costs.
Under the law and the constructs of regulation in place.
And the transparency for that accounting is important to me, because I don't want us to step into something 10 years from now or 5 years from now when we realize that market conditions have changed and we're subsidizing a competitive product to the detriment of the U.S. Postal Service.
Exactly. Congressman, if I may just take a minute or 30 seconds to put in a little context. Before 2006, there was not the vibrant transparency and accountability that exists today. And right now, the Postal Regulatory Commission tells the Postal Service how to measure costs, how to report them. We're in the midst right now of.
So we're not hiding institutional costs with the parcels.
Based on our review, that is not the case. We do have one PS. Every 5 years, we have to set what collectively competitive products must contribute to the overhead, and we're in the midst of that review right now, and the law says it has to be an appropriate share. So we're going to be looking at what collectively each year the Postal Service. Right now it's 5.5%. Postal Service this past year, it was about 17%, well above.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Rolando, I would be remiss if you and I didn't have a conversation. I miss seeing you as much as I'm sure you miss seeing me. But be that as it may, still the one issue remains that 80% of the costs of the Postal Service is labor. And as markets continue to diversify and products continue to change, we're going to come back and look at how we handle the labor costs. Are you prepared? Do you think that it's going to be necessary that we have to now start looking at collective bargaining again in terms of how we deal with the costs of labor?
I didn't know you were gone, but
I made that much of an impact.
No, seriously, that's what we've been doing for the last 10 years. This isn't something that's been on the sideline while we wait.
And I appreciate you always coming to the table on that. And I know you defend and advocate very well for your association of letter carriers, and I admire that. I just don't think we can ever remove you from the equation, and it's an ongoing process that we're going to have with you and your association.
And it has been, continues to be.
Thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Chair recognizes Mr. Cummings.
Just based on that last, just the 30 seconds, just based on Mr. Ross's last question, again, I want to reiterate, I have not seen unions work so hard to try to come up with solutions anywhere than the postal unions. And we could not have done this, and I'm sure all of everybody up here will agree, without the unions. And I really thank you, because it's difficult, because you have to, like I said, you got to balance the needs of your members, their expectations, and at the same time and it calls for phenomenal leadership. And I just want to take time to thank all of you for what you've done. I just wanted to reiterate that.
The gentleman recognizes the gentleman with the stylish glasses from Missouri for 5 minutes.
And, Mr. Chair, I noticed that the ranking member took some of my time. Oh, no, they restarted. Very good.
The gentleman will recognize that the chairman is always fair with his time. We're glad the gentleman from Missouri could get out of bed to come to the hearing.
No, in seriousness, let me say that the Postal Service has a complex and critical mission to deliver mail to every community, every business, and every American in the U.S. 6 days a week. Currently, the Postal Service delivers to nearly 154 million addresses, which is a staggering number. Ms. Brennan, obviously the Postal Service has to have enough personnel and a large enough network to serve this number of addresses, doesn't it?
That's correct. We need to maintain an extensive network that includes facilities, equipment, people, and the like.
Which adds to a substantial fixed cost, doesn't it?
Correct, Congressman.
These fixed costs are continually growing because the Postal Service must deliver mail to 900,000 new addresses a year. Is that correct?
Roughly, yes, sir.
It's difficult to cover these fixed overhead costs because the Postal Service's mail volume and revenues have declined and are expected to continue declining. Since 2007, total mail volume has declined by 27%, and the volume of first-class mail has declined by 35%. Ms. Brennan, first-class mail provides the greatest amount of revenue to help cover the Postal Service's overhead costs. Is that correct?
That's correct. It defines our requirements and pays the bills, and it's why we've taken the actions we have over the past few years to scale to demand based on that decline.
Sure. And the Postal Service's package business has grown significantly, but the volume of package delivery has not been enough to make up for lost first-class mail volume. Is that correct?
That's correct. Package volume is roughly 3% of our total volume.
Now, how much of an increase in package volume would you need to make up for lost first-class mail volume? Any idea?
A volume increase of percent would be roughly 250%.
Okay. And Ms. Brennan and Ms. Rectanus, you have both previously testified that the Postal Service's untenable fiscal situation is tied to a flaw in the agency's business model. On one side, the law limits the Postal Service's ability to increase its revenues because it cannot raise postage rates above the CPI-based price cap, and the Postal Service's authority to pursue new products and services is severely limited. Ms. Rectanus, do I have that correct?
Again, these are legal current requirements. I don't think GAO has classified them as flaws, but yes, we have said that those are currently legal requirements that either they must meet or affect their ability to generate revenue.
And on the other side, the Postal Service is limited in its ability to cut costs, a significant portion of which are fixed costs relating to the network, pensions, and health care benefits. Is that correct?
That is correct. There are legal requirements that they make these pension payments, and as we've talked about before, there are some legislative prohibitions that affect their ability to downsize or right size or make other changes that would help reduce some of their expenses.
So we are in line for another postal rate increase, is that correct? Or maybe someone else. Ms. Brennan, can you answer that?
Well,
We're in line.
We just recently, Congressman, raised prices on our market dominant within that strict price cap of 0.8%. We also have the 10-year price review before the commission currently.
And then how much of the shortfall will that help make up, or does it just keep us above water?
Well, it's part of the path to wellness, if you will. It's this legislation that will generate over $26 billion over 5 years. It's the PRC price review, and it's continued management action.
Mm-hmm. And we should not be surprised by the Postal Service's financial situation, considering that the private sector businesses don't have these restrictions, which means that I think this committee is on the right path by reviewing this legislation and hopefully moving it out. Mr. Chairman, I see that my limited time has expired, and I will yield back whatever's left.
The gentleman's gone over an unlimited amount of allocation, and so the chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes for a series of questions. I want to thank each of you. Mr. Rolando, I want to come to you. Your statement was just unbelievable. You said all 4 unions support this bill with no changes. Is that correct? Is that correct? With no changes, you support this bill, all 4 unions?
Yeah, all 4 unions support this bill. I think we mentioned 2 tweaks in the written testimony that we thought would be helpful.
Yeah, but if those 2 tweaks don't get done, this is better than...
Totally support this bill coming out of committee, absolutely.
All right, Mr. Orlando, thank you for your willingness to put it forth. I know that comes as some cost to some of your members. They're not all unified in supporting necessarily this bipartisan bill, so I recognize that.
No, we believe we got the members covered.
Okay, well, very good. So let me come back a little bit. I am willing to invest the political capital. We have a number of stakeholders that are here as we are looking to truly save the Postal Service as we know it. At the same time, what I don't want is a hearing to happen 10 years from now where the GAO comes in and says shortly after the 2006 bill was passed, we started on a path that was fiscally not responsible. Of course, your opening testimony said from 2007 on. So it means the minute that we passed the bill, we've had an issue since we passed that 2006 bill. Is that correct?
I think when the bill was passed, there was a sense that this was a forward-thinking, foresight-focused effort. I think the Postal Service itself recognized that these were a good idea. Don't know if anyone anticipated the recession that would come after and the inability to...
Yeah, but 2007, the recession wasn't here at 2007. Your testimony said 2007. We were still blowing and going at that particular time.
That's true. 2007 is when the Postal Service first started recording those losses.
Okay, so Ms. Brennan, I want to come to you because part of what you've talked about is, well, this helps the balance sheet, but you're leaving yourself an out that says that if Mr. Taub doesn't do what he believes, what you believe is appropriate there, that you could still potentially have problems. So what do you believe Mr. Taub needs to do?
Mr. Chairman, my point there was that having a strict price cap on products that generate roughly 74% of your revenue and having a universal service requirement.
But you're making money on those products. According to your balance sheet, you're making money, so, why would you need an increase?
Well, my point is that a strict price cap, again, where you've got competition in every product line, including in market dominant,
well, the only competition you really have at market dominant is the internet. When we really look at let's be honest about it. Competition, the way that you're defining it, is very different on packages than it is on your market dominant product. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Well, if you look at electronic diversion, whether it's bill payment, and then when you look at our standard or our advertising mail, which is susceptible to digital advertising, which
right, the internet.
Certainly, exactly, but has certainly increased. that puts pressure on the organization. But I'm not saying.
So what would you like to see from Mr. Taub, getting back to my question?
I'd like there to be no cap and to give postal leadership the opportunity to set
All right.
price.
So let's go with no cap and your ability to set the price as you see fit. So let's go to the elephant in the room that we continue to hear about, and that's service standards. Senator Heitkamp has spent a number of calls. I've committed to her that we will address service standards. So a two-day package, how long does it take for a two-day package to get there before they get a refund under the Postal Service?
The only refund would be if it's a Priority Mail Express piece.
So a two-day package, when you're advertising a two-day package, if it takes 6 days to get there, do they get their money back?
No, it's a service standard, not a guarantee. But
All right.
clearly,
Do you make that clear?
yes,
Okay, because when we go and we get a two-day package, how many days do you think we expect it to take to get there?
2 days.
Exactly. So when it doesn't get there in 2 days, who do we blame?
Well, it's a failure on our part. There's a process failure that we need to address.
All right, so when you don't do that, when Senator Heitkamp gets complaints or I get complaints, where does the responsibility or the penalties lie? I mean, how do we fix that?
Well, I think we've demonstrated that we've addressed systemic issues, but I would also
Well, not
offer.
according to Ms. Heitkamp and not according to me. You haven't addressed the systemic issues. You may have addressed some, but from a service standard, we need to make sure that all these stakeholders, because I just got pulled into 5 newspaper owners just the other day because they knew the hearing was coming. And they said it doesn't do them any good when a newspaper is supposed to get there on a Thursday and it's got coupons for a Thursday, Friday, and it gets there on Monday, or if it gets there 2 weeks later. So how do we make sure that service standards get pulled into this?
Well, I would say, first of all, Mr. Chairman, obviously, service is foundational. It's key to growth for us. And we address any service issue that is experienced by a customer. In terms of how you address it, I think we have had some conversation regarding maintaining the existing service standards as is.
But I've talked to some of your union employees, going back to Mr. Rolando, and they say that the way that you measure that sometimes misrepresents. It allows you to take your best service standards with first-class mail, and yet some of the others, is that not accurate?
We measure every class of mail.
All right, so which one, are you meeting service standards across the board?
In terms of last fiscal year, we made our composite service standard for,
You just changed the word. You said you had them individually, and then you just used the word composite. So which of those individually did you meet or not meet?
we met our standard service performance target for last year. We met our
On
scanning.
each one of those categories?
No, our composite.
That's what I'm asking. You're giving me an answer to a question I didn't ask. So in these individual buckets, which ones did you meet and which ones did you not meet?
In terms of how we measure performance, last year, we did not meet the service standard in our first class, in our priority, or our standard. We showed marked improvement compared to the prior year.
So three of how many buckets?
We established the service goals with the Board of Governors, and we established...
Well, there is no Board of Governors anymore.
There was at the time.
There was a
Mr.
Board of
Chairman.
Governor.
There was an independent governor, yes, at the time, and we established stretch targets.
So I'm running out of time. So out of how many buckets do you have for service standards? Because you just said you didn't meet them in
those
three of
we
them.
did not. We met our scanning target, we met our customer insight target, and we met our parcel select target.
All right.
3 of the 6.
So how can you say as a composite that you're meeting the service standards? If you're losing 50% of the time, how are you meeting the standard?
The example I was giving you on standard or marketing or advertising mail was we measure letter volume, we measure flat volume, we measure the volume whether it's entered at a sectional center facility or upstream at a network distribution center. We provide that level of granularity to our customers and to the industry.
All right. I'm way over time, so I'm going to recognize the gentlewoman from Illinois, Ms. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to the witnesses. The reform proposal approved by the committee during the last Congress includes a provision championed by Ranking Member Cummings to create a Chief Innovation Officer position to lead the development of innovative postal and non-postal products and services. Ms. Brennan and Mr. Rolando, there is some agreement among some of the major stakeholders about allowing the post office to partner with state, local, and tribal governments. Isn't that true?
That's correct.
Yes, it is. I believe Chairman Chaffetz has initiated some of those efforts within his own state. Yeah.
Well, I was going to ask for an update. Any, beside that, any update about it?
In terms of current efforts?
Yes.
Within the constraints of the law, one example would be working with the Census Bureau in Arizona to onboard new employees, utilizing in-person proofing at our retail units.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Obviously, to be financially viable, the Postal Service must reduce costs and increase revenue we've been talking about, and you've taken significant steps to reduce costs over the last several years, which has resulted in about $14 billion in annual servings, but there are limits to how much you can cut costs and still meet the universal delivery mandate and preserve an adequate level of service. So let's talk about the other side of the equation, increase revenues. One option is for the Postal Service to expand the products and services it offers. That was a mouthful. Ms. Rectenis and Mr. Taub, do you agree that in order to be financially viable in the long term, it is important for Postal Service to develop innovative products and services?
GO's position is that there has to be a delicate balance between revenue generation and cost cutting. In that respect, we do support the Postal Service efforts to generate revenue consistent with the role that it plays. For those areas where it could make appropriate money, we would support that. We would not support areas where it would unfairly benefit because of its monopoly and infrastructure status. And given its financial situation, we also would not support anything that's inherently risky.
I certainly agree. The Postal Service under current law is not only authorized but encouraged to undertake as many dynamic and interesting and innovative postal products. What they are barred from under current law is getting into non-postal products, but certainly when it comes to postal products and services, the sky's the limit, and as I said, I know the Postmaster General and her team are focused on, as they call it, innovating the core, which is what it should be about.
And do you guys have anything that you would recommend?
Attached to my testimony is a long list of recommendations that we just sent to the President and Congress recently under a mandate of law. Some of that was along the lines of, to your question, allowing a little bit more flexibility on experimental product offerings, whether it's revenue limits or length of time or the statutory requirements that they can undertake. When it came to non-postal services and products, the Commission recommended that we have a very mature regulatory system in place for reviewing and approving postal products and services, so that could work well as a protection for the public interest, shall we say, from the unfair competition aspect, if the Postal Service were allowed to broaden the aperture and get into non-postal products.
And Ms. Brennan, can you tell us about some of the efforts that the Post Office has undertaken that the Postal Service can pursue?
Currently, in terms of innovation, one example I would provide is informed delivery, where we're testing the consumer would receive on their smartphone a digital image of the mailbox content that will be delivered today, and also provide a click to shop option there.
Okay. And how is your financial situation preventing you from being innovative?
Now, I think the overall financial condition of the Postal Service informs every decision we make. So clearly, we have to prioritize and remain focused on core business.
Okay. I can't compete with Representative Lynch with his 17 family members in the post office, but I have 5. And so I have to be able to go home too. But I do believe that to ensure the Postal Service's long-time viability, that we in Congress have to do everything we can to provide the agency more authority and flexibility to find ways to cut costs and increase revenue. Thank you. I yield back.
The gentlewoman has access to popcorn that the gentleman from Missouri would never have access to, that makes her a cut above, I assure you. So the gentleman recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman.
Yeah, Ms. Brennan, you say that the current rate cap is completely unsuitable, which I understand. But aren't you concerned that significantly upping the rates would result in further decrease in the mail volumes?
Congressman, absolutely. That we do not want to do anything that would further accelerate moving out of the mail. I think if you look at the history prior to the PAEA, the Postal Service, on balance, filed price increases that were relatively modest.
Okay. Mr. Sackler, industry is the biggest user of the mail, and that's the largest contributor to volume. Maybe we call that junk mail sometimes. I don't know. Maybe you don't call it that. What effect would an increase have on the declining volume, the industry?
It would have a major impact, Mr. Grothman. Not just in the direct mail promotional kinds of categories, but further diversion into electronic alternatives and the very profitable first-class mail. Just to point out, that mail is marked up more than 330%. So it's invaluable to the postal system, and if the rates go up in a very significant way from here, the outflow, which has been starting to plateau a little bit, would reaccelerate, and probably in a great extent.
Okay. HR 756 proposed a 2.1% increase, is that right? You think that's going to have an effect?
It may have an effect on some. There are some in the industry, as you may know, and as Chairman Meadows may know, that oppose even that amount of increase as unaffordable. The large majority of the industry, however, is willing to accept the risk of adding 2.15% onto the rate base in exchange for getting this bill, which on balance would be hugely helpful through the Congress.
Okay, maybe you've already covered it, but when you have projections the out years, are you projecting that to cause a decrease in mail volume?
I think that with the establishment of so much trust and reliance on electronic media, there is little that can be done to reverse some of the outflow of mail. But if you add a huge increase on top of that, it's going to accelerate it dramatically. That's the worry of the industry.
Okay, you consider the 2.1% not a significant increase? Is that what you're telling us?
It is significant, but it is one that, to put it colloquially, we're all holding our noses and accepting in the spirit of compromise in order to get this bill done.
Okay. Ms. Brennan, one other thing. Do you think you can do anything to stop the decline in mail volumes?
Congressman, in terms of the first-class mail, I think the best we can do is slow the diversion of first-class mail. I think the efforts with the industry in terms of giving print a digital reflection will help us stabilize the marketing mail or the advertising mail. And regarding the package growth, given the competition, particularly in the last mile, our forecast is that the rate of growth will slow. So we'll face these upward pressures, and as I noted earlier, we'll continue to make responsible decisions and scale to the demand.
Is there anything else you'd like to have if this didn't have to be a compromise bill? You could have your dream bill?
I don't want to alienate the individuals to the far left. However, I would say we initially had proposed restoring the full exigent price increase as opposed to the compromise of 2.1, but we certainly recognize this is a compromise bill, and we value the industry. They're our business partners, and we want to keep them at the table and in the mail.
Okay, I'll yield the remainder of my time.
I thank the gentleman. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from the District of Columbia, Ms. Eleanor Holmes Norton.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this early hearing on the Postal Service. After all, we got through a bipartisan postal bill last Congress. It had to go to another committee, so it didn't come out of the Congress. But when you hear Mr. Rolando say that all four unions support this bill, and you had Democrats and Republicans supporting this bill. I'm very hopeful that this time we can get this bill done. I have a question about an age-old issue, the pension issue. And in the last bill, we required the Postal Service to use demographic assumptions of the Postal Service, specific to the Postal Service, to calculate pension liabilities. For the record, Ms. Brennan, what is there about the demographics of the postal workforce as compared with the federal government workforce that apparently lowers the costs for the Postal Service's pension?
Ma'am, there are a couple issues. One, in terms of demographics, the age of the workforce, the turnover rate, the economic assumptions go to the salary growth. Given that we're largely blue-collar, 90% of our employees' salaries are negotiated through collective bargaining agreements. And this provision in and of itself will generate roughly $4 billion over 5 years for the Postal Service.
So, the factors that differ or separate you out from the federal government workforce are collective bargaining?
No, ma'am. Specifically, the demographics or the age of the workforce.
The age of the workforce is younger?
Yes, and particularly the non-career employees. We have over 135,000 flexible workforce. Also, the turnover rate, and then the economic assumptions I stated were based on the fact that the majority of our employees' salaries are determined through collective bargaining agreements.
The turnover rate, is it greater or less than the federal government?
In terms of our non-career employees, it's greater. In terms of our career employees, I believe it's better. It's less than 1%, but I'd have to check those numbers, ma'am.
Could I ask Ms. Rectanas, do you agree with this assumption that we've been making in the last bills, I think it's in this bill as well, that specific demographics of the Postal Service should be used rather than demographics from the federal workforce?
We do support that under the premise that if you're going to be identifying surpluses and liabilities, you want to use the most accurate data you have. So we do support using postal-specific assumptions.
Here's the rub, and perhaps one of you could explain this to me. The CBO has also estimated, but used the OPM, Office of Personnel Management, but it is estimated that using postal-specific demographic data to calculate contributions owed by the Postal Service would result in a huge amount, $6 billion, an increase in the contributions from all other federal agencies. Now, the CBO could not explain that, since you would assume that although the payments go into one fund, changing the assumptions on one side would result in an equal and opposite change on the other side. So do any of you have an explanation, as CBO itself did not, on why the contributions owed yield a $6 billion increase in contributions to all other federal agencies, that all other federal agencies would be required to make?
I would just comment, Delegate Norton, that we're asking OPM for redetermination of that value.
Thank you. Considering that I'm sure the chairman would like to move this bill, do you expect that to come in the near future?
I can't answer that, ma'am.
Ms. Chairman, I think the committee ought to ask, lest we find that there's rebellion from the federal workforce, because this is an unexplained difference between the overall federal workforce and the postal workforce. If we could inquire and perhaps ask the CBO to further explain its $6 billion increase finding.
Well, the only thing that the chair recognizes is a CBO analysis is the only entity that makes a weatherman's forecast look good. And so with that, I will be glad to ask for clarification from CBO.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank each of you for your input, for your testimony here today. I want to thank the stakeholders. I have learned more about postal reform than I've ever cared to know based on your input, but it has been very valuable input. As we look at this, one just remaining item, Ms. Brennan, I'm going to ask you, and I believe that in talking to your Deputy Postmaster General that I have this commitment, but I want for the record, we need a real transparency as it relates to your financials and how we can look at this, because there seemed to be an indication that that's totally in the purview of the PRC and bypassing Congress. I'm certain that that was not the message that was meant to be sent, but it was the message that was received. And so my concern is when we look at that, you're asking for Congress to act to provide relief. I can't make that informed decision without clear financials. And so do I have your commitment to make sure you get to this committee the type of financials with transparency that helps us make an informed decision?
Yes, any information you need, Mr. Chairman, and I suspect you're talking specifically about the costing methodologies and cost attribution?
Well, as we look at that, yes.
Yes.
I'm a business guy. And,
Understood.
And when you look at, for example, we've got $2.5 billion increase in institutional cost when we have the first-class mail volume going down. So I need to know where the 2.5 increase in institutional costs went, since obviously it can't be attributed to those areas. And I'm not asking you to answer that here today, unless you
However,
want,
I may.
If you want to get into it. I don't think you want to go there today. Why don't we just leave it for the
That's fair.
record?
That's fair.
Because as we look at institutional costs, I have a great concern that we mandated it at a certain percentage in 2006. And yet what we have, your revenue, about 25% of it now comes from packages, and that mandated compliance has not changed. And so that's for a more in-depth discussion that we won't hold in a public forum, but as long as I have your commitment.
You have my commitment, whatever information you need. Absolutely.
All right. The other I would ask you is to get with Senator Heitkamp on service standards.
Will do.
If she's not happy, I'm not happy, and I'm saying that from the other side of the aisle. Okay, and so we need to make sure that service standards are addressed. And so if there is no further business before this committee, the committee stands adjourned.